I'm so glad that you guys could jump on with me for a few minutes on this very cold and rainy Sunday after Thanksgiving. I hope you guys all had a really great holiday and got to spend some time with family or just chilling and at peace this week and get some rest. So, we want to jump right into some big movement talk. We all know the big coined phrase gross motor. It's in many of the curriculums as a separate compartment that is deemed to be necessary, but a lot of times we associate gross motor with outdoor play. So getting on those big equipment, the slides, and doing things like that. And while that's completely accurate, we want to also talk about the role of gross motor or any form of big movement in the classroom, inside the living room, and how it translates to the brain. So, what we're going to do today is kind of break gross motor down, hopefully in a little bit of a different way that's going to let us build it more structurally into everyday's curriculum, even on days like today where you may not be taking your kiddos or your class outside. So, let's talk about a few of the function of gross motor to begin with. One of the primary reasons that we really want to include gross motor play and really emphasize the development of those big joint and muscle movements is to integrate primary reflexes. And we'll go over all of those here in just a minute. The second thing that gross motor does, of course, is produce equalized strength for co-coordination. And what that means is the front of the body is equal in work load to the back of the body, or the left side of the body equal to the right side of the body, and it creates correct balance and the way that the muscles co-contract to keep the body correctly positioned. So gross motor play is absolutely vital for that. And without some of those components being practiced consistently, you can find that the brain will kind of get a little lopsided in how it communicates on what part of the body picks up the work. So we're going to go over that one as number two. Number three, the third one is it builds confidence and skill development for your child's own brain. So if you have confidence that I can get up those stairs all by myself, then you also will have confidence that translates into other areas. So big body movement at a very young age can translate into a whole brain confidence. And it also contributes to balance in the vestibular system. So the more big movement we have, the more regulated our head sense becomes. So then you have more balance here. And the more balance and structure you get in this system, as we talked about like in our sensory processing videos, the more success you're going to have later with the finite visual tracking and head stability that's needed for those smaller tasks. Not smaller is in less important, smaller fine motor tasks that's going to come later as a demand on the brain. So writing, utensil use, tracking for reading, things like that. All of the skill development begins in big movement early on. So let's start with the first one. We said our very first thing that gross motor play develops is the integration of reflexes. Sorry, every time I say reflexes, my brain wants to say sensory processing. Two completely different things, but they're stuck together today. So if I pause, that's why. So when we're talking about integrating reflexes, we want to kind of name just a quick few. And these are fun, guys, to look up online. You just Google them, see what they are, and then watch your kiddo. It's so interesting to see the basic movement that you may not know is there for a reason, is actually your kiddo consistently practicing the integration of a reflex. So two of the really important ones that you're going to see very early on are called spinal reflexes. So those are the ones that the message starts with the position and contraction around the spinal cord, and that comes up to the brain, and it's called the STNR and the ATNR. We don't need to go into detail about all the names, but just so you have acronyms to work with. So STNR, 4 letters, and ATNR, 4 letters. Those two are really important. The first one is the STNR, and that's the one that is really seen integrated when you see your kiddo go to crawling. So it's vital for getting the brain to put the hands down together and then separate arm movement from leg movement so they can move cohesively but as independent parts. So a lot of times we will have kiddos that are a little bit older come to us, and their coordination's just a little bit off, and it's hard to pinpoint why. Like there's no direct injury or diagnosis that we can link it to, but you just know that the balance, maybe the spatial awareness is a little bit delayed, or there's a lot of fear with certain movements, insecurity on certain platforms, that sort of thing. So parents will bring them to us and just kind of question what's going on. So you can look very quickly, and kiddos that really have a hard time getting down in that crawling position typically is a retained STNR, meaning that crawling movement wasn't practiced enough at that developmental phase. So it becomes kind of a thing when you see kiddos that go right from rolling, sitting, pulling right to walking. And they're like, they move so quick, they develop so fast, they didn't even crawl. And a lot of times as a therapist, we're like, oh, no. And so we're going to back them up. Even my older kiddos, as much as, 5, 6, 8 years old, we're going to do crawling activities. So we crawl under a table or through the tunnels and things like that, so that we are building motor movement that integrates. So to integrate means to take a primary reflex that you were born with that is there for basic survival and protection of the brain and body, and it structures it so that it becomes automatic in the system with movement later. So you don't need some of those basic reflexive movements when you're older, you need them when you're younger. If they do not go away, they don't integrate into the system as like flawless movement patterns, then the brain kind of gets stuck in this survival pattern and it can't do the big movements needed here. So when we say the word integration, that's all we mean, is that the brain is now taking an automatic response and structured into functional movement. That's it. So if your STNR is not integrated, it hasn't been moved from automatic into functional, then you're going to see kiddos get stuck with some of those tracking movements, with separating arms and legs. Your movement might be awkward. Balance is going to be affected. The second one is the ATNR. This one is really big. This is basically what we call like our feeding reflex. It's where if you turn the head, then one arm folds and one arm comes out. And then if you turn the head the other way, it does the same thing. So you kind of get this collapse and open in sync with the head movement. Again, crawling is going to be really important to get this one integrated. A really big one to integrate this one is bringing the hands together. So this is our key for midline. If you have a little one that is learning to write and struggles really hard with crossing the page, has a hard time staying online with tracking with reading, typically we are going to see a retained ATNR in our school-age kids. It's going to be something that's usually very quiet and in the background if it's been retained. And it doesn't show up until those big vestibular call to action is needed. And then we're going to see difficulties in those basics academic skills and getting them down on hands and knees, crossing midline, doing things that create movement in the body. So big hand clap games, moving big shoulder movement, crossing the leg, hopscotch. So kind of crisscrossing the legs, pulling the arms in and out. Moving the head back and forth. So a lot of music games really work hard on integrating the ATNR. And that's a great thing to do indoors also. So you're not dependent on that playground equipment to do that. So another one is going to be stepping reflex. We see this one very, very early on its development. So as soon as the baby's feet are kind of placed on the surface, and this is before babies are truly stable. Typically you can see this really, really early. Their automatic response is to kind of start pulling one foot up and then the other. It's kind of a choppy movement. So we want to make sure we see that, but we want to have time to integrate that, to use that to develop functional skills. So lots of practice in pushing up on those legs and increasing stability in the hips is really vital for that. Moral reflex is your startle reflex. That's if the baby starts to be tipped backwards, their arms fly out. This is the basis for your writing reflexes. What that means is not writing as in W-R-I-T. Writing as in putting the body upright. So that's, I start to fall over and I put my hand out, or I'm going backwards and I can put my hands back. I understand that one side of my body contracts when the other side relaxes to put myself back at center, to maintain my balance. And so having that reflex not being integrated into functional writing reflexes creates a hypersensitive startle reflex, and it can actually cause difficulties in getting the arms to center. So the brain and the body kind of always stay in this weird extension, or there's a hypersensitivity in that startle system, and so that becomes non-functional movement, retained tension, shoulder tension, and then reduced movement here. So there's just kind of a retained stiffness in that. And so practicing for that moral, that startle reflex is really important. The last one I kind of want to touch on is the TLR. So this one's interesting. I like to call this one our Superman reflex. This is you put your baby on their belly and they want to go wee. Or if you pull their arms in and they kind of just collapse, so the baby crunch, right? They just kind of want to draw those knees in. So what this is wherever the chin is going, the whole body kind of follows. So if the chin goes into extension, the neck's extended, then the whole body extends and they kind of do that fly away, float on their belly, or vice versa. The chin comes down to center and it's drawing the whole body in. If the TLR is retained, it is going to make standing to sit or pulling up on furniture, those basic movements become really difficult because if you look down to go up the steps and you kind of collapse in on yourself, then you're folding the center of the body so it can't use its muscles correctly for stability to work on assisted stepping. Or if you look up when you're going somewhere and the body goes into extension, you are blocking all of the balance reflexes that you have because you're fighting the TLR. So those are the basic five I want to touch base. There's definitely more. It's not limited to that. Those are some of the most commonly retained reflexes we see. And what do we do for those? Big gross motor play. We're going to purposely put the body into the crawling position. Practice pulling the arms forward, tucking the elbows in. We're going to put you on your tall knees. So sitting on the knees with the hips up at the side of a surface and reaching to break through some of those reflexes. We're going to practice big head movement. We're going to practice dropping things in a box and pulling our arms away, big clapping, crossing midline. So if we are thinking very early on, oh, my baby isn't really doing gross motor movement yet because we aren't old enough for a playground, or we're not throwing a ball yet, or we're not doing those big things. Just think basic movement has to be full range through our joints and use both sides of our brain. So we're going to want to cross over and make sure that upper body and lower body are using both. And one of the most important areas is that neck. So if you notice, 3 out of the 5 I just mentioned, we're very dependent on neck position, whether the neck is turning back and forth or going forward, backward. That becomes really important for communicating to the nerves of the spine, the base of the brainstem, and for that balance system. So even very early on, guys, starting conscious big movement play, very great. If your little one progresses through that crawling phase almost so fast it doesn't look like they participated, then you know, hey, I want to make sure I get my baby down on hands and knees, even at 1, 2, 3 years old. And those indoor tunnels, throw a blanket over the table and play tent. Those are absolutely fantastic ways to do that. And you can even do like tapping games up on the wall to get the head extended and practice the breakdown of some of those reflexes, strengthening the back and the chest and the stomach at the same time. All right, so that's number 1. Gross motor movement fully integrates or uses our base reflexes functionally to make us a very sustainable person, right? Number 2 is going to be producing equalized strength for co-contraction and coordination in the body. So what does that mean? If we stand the body up sideways, so if I was to do a cross section of my body and I was going to say, okay, the front functions like this and the back functions like this, overall, very roughly, the back has bigger, more stable muscles than the front. Why do we always say, oh, it's so hard to build my stomach muscles, but my back really rocks, right? And it's because we're just biologically kind of structured that way. The back of the leg muscle, the back muscle of your calf is definitely bigger than the little tiny front you have with that big bone in it. And so it becomes imbalanced at times if gross motor play is not integrated really well, consistently enough, that the brain naturally will say, oh, I need my back muscle to support all of my seated position. And the front gets a little bit floppy. So you're going to see slumping, or you're going to see a lack of balance, or you're going to see kiddos that get really fussy when they sit for a while because there's a lot of fatigue in the back because the front of the body is not engaging to do like a contract and relax and a constant flux like this should be happening. And if it's not, then you're going to fatigue those low back muscles. It's doing all the work and everything else is kind of asleep. Same thing with the front of the arm, the back of the arm. And what practices this the best to keep equalized communication going so that all muscle sets are being used is gross motor play. And this is where kicking balls, throwing things into boxes, building towers, even with small blocks, building them up tall, doing magnets up on the fridge and push them up high, or the foam blocks in the bathtub. This is where gross motor play structured into finite movement. So if we think, oh my goodness, my kiddo really can't grasp anything because their hand wants to stay open all the time. Well, that is this side. So back of the hand, this side is picking up all the work, which is pulling that hand open, and this side is weak, which is causing it to not fold in. So when we even start to see fine motor movement is affected by this, where does it start? Big movement, gross motor. Get those hands down on the floor in crawling position, activate them, start communicating texture and sensation to them, and then they'll be ready for fine motor next time. And then using big muscles in the front and the back. So even lay on your back and play games above your head. I think I did the toys last week in the choosing toys session where you have little poppers and they pop onto things. Put them under the table and your kiddo can lay on their back and pull up and down. And you can even lay on your back and you can feel the actual muscle system that's moving, that's contracting. So do that. Practice the movement and go, is this going to use the front or the back of my body more? And would this just naturally use muscle in a more equal way? Try the task out and see. Rolling games. I love the ones that the songs that say like roll like a banana and you have to keep like your body straight. And so you're kind of rolling over your arm, or you have to balance on your side. Standing on one foot's really great. Games like that. Hopscotch is going to be fantastic for that because it's balance. It's going to co-contract front and back. And you also use big skills that integrate reflexes. So moving the legs separately from the body and bringing the midline and open from midline. So it's kind of knocking out two things at one time that are vital for the brain. What else for co-contraction? Core is huge for that. And I always tell people the more vertical space you can work in, especially for our young ones, is going to be helpful. So even if you're working on a magnet board, an easel, you're drawing at an angle, anything like that's going to be great. Standing at a table instead of sitting in a chair, things like that. If you do sit for a long time, putting an angle on that chair, so a wedge is really great because it pulls you out of that 90-degree where the body, see, I even want to do that when I'm sitting here on the floor. Oh, I gotta just slump over. A quick note that I always find interesting is it's very common for kiddos to sit in what we call a W sit. I know you guys all have seen it. It's literally where the legs look like they form the letter W. So their bottom's on the floor and their knees are kind of out here with their feet behind them, right? What that does is put the knees and the hips at risk. So the knees definitely, because it hyperextends to the side, kind of that lateral extension, and it strains these ligaments in the knees because they're not intended to be torqued and support the weight like that. It also decreases the work in that lower core, and it is a big sign of a retained reflex. And so what we want to do is push those knees in so they're sitting on their feet kind of square. Or I will often tell my kiddos, put your feet in front. And so feet out straight. Indian style, or I guess more politically correct now would be crisscross applesauce, is actually really hard for a lot of kids to sit in. That is an open hip position. It uses a lot of that lower back and can be fatiguing. So a good alternative, if your little ones want to sit in that W sit instead, is to sit, say, tall knees, and they can sit and kind of rest their bottom on the back of their heels. That puts the knees back in alignment, but also allows them to kind of push that core down. Another alternative is legs out straight. Some kiddos find that to be a little bit easier, or side sitting. So side saddle sort of position where they just put both feet to one side and then they use the core, and you can practice shifting feet side to side. And that re-engages this front. It's breaking down that primary structure reflex. And so that the brain is communicating to both sides of the body. So if you will see your little one W sitting and you're like, there, you have a hard time sitting in a chair, they're W sitting, I just don't really know what to do. Gross motor play, changing movement, breaking down reflexes, and building proper co-contraction front back of the body is going to help that so much. And it's amazing when you start to intentionally put just a different movement into their play, what changes in their brain and body. It's fascinating to watch. All right, so the third thing that is really important is that building the confidence, environmental awareness, understanding body position, and vestibular, which is a lot of things. Maybe I should have broken those up into more than one section. But what it is is basically using lots of gross motor play early on, breaking down reflexes and integrating them correctly, building proper co-contraction, then yields a really strong sensory system. And the strong sensory system does two things for them. It builds balance and awareness. So, what you do when you have good reflexes, you have good muscle control and communication. The brain kind of relaxes on base control here and focuses more on the communication here. So now my brain can take all this energy and I can focus on where my eyes are. Whoo, my thought just left me. Where my eyes are tracking and where my ears are listening. And when you put those together, we've talked before, that's your vestibular system. That is the basis for balance. And the more gross motor we get, the more balanced structure we're going to have, and the more automatic the movement of the fluid is going to be, and the dependency on vision is going to decrease because those are going to communicate more effortlessly, which is ultimately what we want, even for our systems. We want our body to navigate our environment with less work, right? We don't want to have to overthink everything we're doing. If we're doing more with the vestibular system, that's going to increase the amount of movement we get. We think spinning, jumping, climbing, height, and movement of the inner ear, head movement. Again, that neck position becomes really important. Another thing gross motor play gives us is amazing body awareness, proprioceptive strength. So proprioception, again, is the use of the body understanding how much force and pressure I need to give or get for a task to be completed. So how much movement does my arm need to get that ball there? How much movement does my leg need to step up on that step appropriately and then pull through to pull my other foot up equal? How much speed do I need to get from point A to point B? And where is my body going in relation to my environment? So if we're building gross motor play very consistently into our environment, our kiddos are getting natural practice all the time with body awareness and positioning. Spatial awareness becomes more natural because they can kind of foresee where their body's going to be going and how it's interacting with the things around them or with other people. So you're going to decrease system overwhelm by increasing that gross motor movement. Did I forget anything? Confidence is going to come from that. You'll see a lot of kiddos with fears or hypersensitivities will start to decrease as that confidence, that understanding of your body comes much more naturally, just strictly through gross motor play. Okay. So we kind of went through that one really, really fast. All right. If we wanted to say, I want more gross motor in my living room, and I don't want to think about what reflex I'm using, I don't have time to sit and think about what muscle set I'm using. Jennifer, what is going to be the best way to do this? I'm going to tell you two of my favorite activities to use in gross motor, and I do it all the time. One is going to be obstacle courses. It's one of the easiest way to include all muscle sets to engage most reflexive responses. And it can be as simple as throw some pillows on the floor and some tape on, some pillows on the carpet and some tape on the wood. And all you're going to do is jump on the tape or crawl across the pillows, slither, have to squeeze through the blanket. An obstacle course is quick to put together, quick to clean up. It's very engaging, and you're going to get that body into multiple positions. And then you don't even have to think about what you're working on because it's targeting it all. And this works really great to translate if you're a teacher and want to put this in your classroom. Obstacle courses are absolutely phenomenal. How many times do we get a class of 24, 25 kids and they're kind of in that cabin fever phase? We're entering winter now. They're going to be hitting that phase and they need that release. Gross motor through obstacle course is structured, so it's a little bit more organized. So we're not just running around burning energy by amping up the whole environment. We're very structured. We're following directions, but we're engaging all the body systems. So I cannot speak enough for obstacle courses. Your painter's tape is going to be your best friend, I think, in a daycare center or a preschool. I use it all the time. They love it. It also is great for calming and focusing that visual system. If you get kiddos that are needing gross motor release and that's not an option right now, you can use that visual system to kind of drive hyper focus. And painter's tape on the floor, if you've previously put down an obstacle course, is going to spot on be one of your best friends. The second thing that I like to do are animal races. These are a lot of fun because when we talk about getting kids in the crawling position, to use all of the reflexes, to integrate fine motor, to talk about sensory processing, and to use crossing midline, crawling is it, right? So animal races get you down into that structure. Again, it's going to be more organized for your classroom. So you're not just running around, you have an intention. So it's going to be walk like a crab or um, run like a bear or what's another? Oh, camel. I love to do camel walks because it tips the head upside down, which is going to be, again, more engaging for vestibular system. Just changes head position, fluid in the ears shift forward, and then you have the opportunity of increasing the input for that system, makes it a little bit more engaging. So there's a lot of different options online. You can look up animal walks, and there's songs, and there's all different ways you can layer that play really well. So, like, mom, if you are cooking in the kitchen and little one is kind of jumping off the couches and woo, going crazy like kids do, especially when it's been cold out, you can throw on that animal song, and that's something that can then direct that motor movement to something more functional. And hey, today we targeted all of the basic skills. We did great. Okay. And so that's a really great one that I like. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. Gross motor is fun. I love it. It's not limited to outside play. Think about the different ways you can take those big joint movements, move them inside, and equalize front and back. So even your basic exercise games or your basic yoga games, and there's so many of them out there now, guys. You really can't go wrong if you're getting your kiddos' whole body engaged and using your environment. You're going to be spot on. So good luck with including more gross motor. Hope that explains a little bit of how it uses the brain. If you have any questions, reach out and ask, and I'll look forward to speaking with you. Have a good weekend. Bye, guys.